Hi, welcome to Washington Policy on the Go. My name is David Bose, the Communications Director for Washington Policy Center. And today we have a special episode for you. We usually come to you every other week with one of our center directors to talk about the latest research of Washington Policy Center. But coming up on September 20th at the Davenport Grand in Spokane, our annual dinner will be taking place. You can get information all about it at wpcdinner.com. But part of that presentation at the event will be Dr. Robert Marbut. Dr. Marbut is well known as the homelessness czar of the federal government. He served under two presidents. He's actually been involved in government under three presidents. He's also a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute Center for Wealth and Poverty. He will be at the dinner presenting solutions on homelessness along with the actor William Baldwin, who he has a film project, both a documentary and a feature film project with, detailing the challenges of homelessness in the United States. And so I wanted to welcome Dr. Marbut here so that we could talk about homelessness because obviously it's a problem across Washington State. There's no major city in the state that's not grappling with this challenge, and very few, even the smaller towns, that aren't seeing an impact from these challenges as well. So, Dr. Marbut, thanks so much for making the time today.
Thank you very much for having us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, so let's start with, one of the challenges I think in any debate is language. And if the language is presented, control the language, control the debate. And one of the ways that we talk about this problem is we define it by the homes, by whether or not someone has a house. Is homelessness really the right way to describe the problem that we're facing? Or would you, if it wasn't for the fact that it's shorthand and people understand, what we're talking about right away, if all things being equal, would you choose a different way to describe the real problem that we're facing?
That is a fabulous question. Believe it or not, it's the first time I've ever been asked that in 20 years of doing this, but it's probably the most important one to understand, other than maybe how do you measure it, and then what is the measurement of success. When you look at people experiencing homelessness, whether it's family and children on one side of the equation, Department of Ed, or HUD, single adults, once you lose your house, you've lost other things before that. And normally it starts with untreated mental illness, substance abuse, and I'm talking street level homeless here. And then you stop getting to go to a job, you lose your permanent job, then you get a temp job, then you lose that, then you lose your transportation, you lose your housing, and then maybe you move to a lower level of housing, then you lose that, then you couch surf, then you lose your friends, your family, and you're no longer couch surfing, and then you may get to a shelter, and then you don't want to follow the rules, and you've lost now all your credit, all your credit cards have been taken away, you've exhausted your bank account, you borrowed all the money, now you end up on the street. So you've lost a lot of things. You've lost family, friends, credit rating, credit cards, housing, probably 2 or 3 levels of housing. Then you've gone through housing with your family and friends, you lose that. And then you burn through what a shelter has tried to offer to help you. And so we could have, and along the way, you lose your car here. So we could have said this creditlessness. It could have been carlessness. It could have been, loss of family and friendsness. But for some reason or another, it ended up long before me about homelessness. And so therefore, if you give somebody a home, you've solved the problem. And back to the control the language. And that couldn't be farther from the truth, especially for street level homelessness, is which most people are talking about now, and most people see on the streets now.
Yeah, and that brings me to, I've seen some pretty significant and pointed criticism of you from some homeless, using the term again, homeless advocacy groups or self-defined homeless advocacy groups, that say, well, Dr. Marbut doesn't support housing first, and housing first is the only way to approach this issue. This is what the evidence supports. How would you differ from that? If give the people who are homeless a home, whatever that looks like, why doesn't that solve the problem? Where does it end up if it doesn't?
You got two or three things in there to unwrap. So let's go through these. And if I miss any, please, bring me back to it.
Sure.
First off, about 12 years ago, when Housing First was officially proposed to the federal government in 2013, I was the first sort of person nationally who said, this is not going to work. It doesn't make sense. It's not clinically based. And there's no research other than what we call small N studies of like 30 people, 20 people that were not randomly sampled, where they predetermined people to go in. And that's the evidence they provide. I'd rather go for double-blind evidence, real research, real scholarly research, or total aggregated data. And I remind everybody in 2013 that the advocates in the President Obama administration said they were going to end homeless in 10 years. They were going to end first in 2015, veteran homelessness, 2016, family homelessness, all type of other homeless would be by 2013. So they went through these benchmarks. Well, the reality is even long before COVID, I'm tired of people blaming it on COVID, but long before COVID, they missed their promises. They missed their mark. And right now, street level homelessness is doubling every 5 years. So instead of this experiment they called Housing First that was going to end all homelessness, not only is it not ended it, it's doubled and tripled in most categories. And street level homeless now is double every 5 years. So it's a catastrophic failure. And if all they can do is attack me personally, that means, we're starting to win the message, because they can't attack the substance. They said homeless would end in 10. It did not. And every one of those people who back in the beginning attacked me, now, and it was interesting, some mainstream media the other day said, you used to be I'm paraphrasing, the jerk in the room. Now you're the canary in the coal mine. And, and I haven't changed my messaging at all. Housing First does not treat the clinical need. The clinical need is not the loss of the house. The clinical need is the untreated mental illness with now co-presenting substance abuse. They're self-medicating, if you will. They're numbing the condition. And until we deal with those two, the untreated mental illness and substance, then we can't get to the next step, which is job retention, or get a job, retain a job to be able to have it. Because if you have a job, not many people I know are homeless that have real paying, full-time, living wage type of jobs, because they can afford to pay for their housing. It's when you lose your job that you can no longer pay for your housing. So why did you lose your job? We got to go back. And it always gets back to, in terms of street level homelessness, 75% of the time is substance use disorders and untreated mental illness. So if we don't go back to the core, all we're doing is putting Band-Aids on it. And to me, the ultimate evidence is, what does the national level aggregated data say? And the devil is in the details. And the details say we're now doubling every 5 years. That is not a success.
Yeah, it was interesting. You pointed this out. I was reading a recent column you wrote, I think it was in the Dallas Morning Journal, about the Obama administration's promise, where they said HUD and veterans, that HUD said that veteran homelessness would end by 2015, that chronic homelessness would end by 2016, family homelessness by 2020, all types by 2020, 30. And as you've already pointed out, instead we're having this exponential rise there. But it led me to wonder, one, why, when such promises are made, such expectations are made based on policy decisions, and then they crumble absolutely, why is there such resistance to reapproaching the issue and looking at a different approach or a different policy? Why is there that sense of instead doubling down on the policy that's actually done the opposite since it was started?
It's mind-boggling to me that when they say that it clearly didn't work. It didn't end homelessness as promised, and in fact, it went. If homelessness had stayed flat, we might could have this weird argument. You missed your expectation, but it still did pretty good. It stayed flat, but it didn't. It missed its. It didn't end it. It was supposed to go like this, and instead it goes like this. It went exactly opposite, which is exactly what I predicted in 2012, 2011, and 2013, because we were no longer addressing the cannibalism. We cannibalized the money that we had treated pre-2013. Let me take a step back. Pre-2013, when you got a house voucher, you also were required to do treatment. You were required to work a treatment plan. So pre-2013, street level homelessness had actually been dropping for about 10 years. A lot of people forget that. Not huge drops, but it was steadily going down, and you had what's called wraparound services. And so there were two groups of people who came along and said, let's do housing first. One sort of part of that group was, let's cannibalize all the treatment resources and let's put all that money into housing vouchers, so we'll have more people housed. Back to your exact point of it's the nomenclature controls the debate. So we got them in a house, we're successful. Well, it turns out that didn't work either. But there were other people who are sort of on the far left, wokey, who just really believe in this stuff, and it's not working. It's the same thing happening with safe consumption sites and fentanyl. This idea that in San Francisco, that you can make fentanyl safe, and we'll have set up an area where you can go do fentanyl and you can do it safely. And mind-boggling, the health authority of Sacramento City and County is paying for the foil, the straws, the torches, the doctor, the Narcan, the little tent around it, and paying for all these safe consumption sites. They don't work. They actually increase fentanyl use, and they certainly increase deaths. And so and this is all under this new rubrics called harm reduction. And I just think we got to push back on this harm reduction and say, maybe there was a kernel of some truth of it 40 years ago that might be clinically based. We've gone off the rails now. We have just gone loony-toony left on this. And until we start really focusing on the root causes, we are never going to be successful at addressing this issue. And instead, you're going to see this increase. You're going to see places like Seattle, which is, by the way, they're pushing back on it now and getting a little better. But Seattle historically, Portland, San Francisco, LA, Honolulu, Vancouver, these are places that are out of control. And at what point do you stop and say, when does the common sense kick in? You promised you would end homeless in 10 years. Instead, it's doubling and tripling. When do we stop nuttiness? And I think the last group, it's ego. There's some of this is ego. They don't want to say they were wrong. They don't want to say I had such attacks 10 years ago, and now I'm getting more and more of this, gosh, they're playing my clips from then, and their ego can't handle to say, the side I was working with turned out to be right and they were wrong, and we got to stop nuttiness. They don't seem to be able to say, we made a mistake, time to make an adjustment.
It's interesting to think about, as you point out, there's in Seattle, for example, there's a place where they were housing chronic addicted alcoholics and others. And, it was thought of as a success because they could stay there. They would still, abuse substances. I used to commute into the morning when I was a broadcaster very early in the morning. I'd see ambulances there on a regular basis, just all the time. But they said that they were saving money on medical care because they could pick them up there. But I also thought that a lot of this quote unquote success has to do with, if you call it just a housing thing, then you make the problem invisible as long as you put them behind a wall, whether it's an old hotel or a room or whatever. But all the other problems and dysfunction and isolation and lack of dignity and lack of contribution to society, all the rest of that is still there and untreated. Is there savings to be had from a government perspective to have just the problem hidden away? Do you find that to be true? And I'll save the follow-up for after that.
There's a real myth, if you give people free housing and subsidize it with taxpayers, it solves homelessness. It doesn't. It doesn't deal with the mental health. It doesn't deal with the substance abuse. So you still have property crime. You still have deaths. homelessness rate has doubled in the cities that have taken on this extreme housing first called rapid rehousing. But I mean, think about this. In the last 24 months, 25 months, death rate has doubled. I actually called one of the advocates on the other side, a housing first advocate, good friend, gave him a call, and I said, have you read the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, the JAMA article? And I said, have you read the article about the doubling of the death rate of homeless? Because they all predicted it was going to be COVID and this, that, and the other. And instead, most of the death rate was people living in a single room provided by government money, and they died of a drug overdose. That's what most of the doubling has occurred. The one little piece that wasn't that was they got hit by a car while they were on drugs. So they're both, to me, directly connected. So drug use has gone up within homelessness, and the death rate has gone up. And JAMA, no right-wing journal at all, came out and said there. So I called this gentleman up and I said, tell me about this. What do you think about it? And you know what his answer was? Well, at least they're dying with respect. And I'm like, dying in a room alone is not respectful. When I was in the White House, one of the things I did is I met with all the coroners up and down. Well, I met with them generally all over the United States, but in particular, San Diego, LA, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, you get the idea. And I went into the one in Los Angeles, and I was meeting with the deputy coroner there. And I asked him, I said, what are we not knowing in all your data reports? I was reading all these data reports. What are you not knowing? There's always something in the understory. And he said, it's how people are being found. And I said, never heard of that. What does that mean? He said, most of the people who are dying homeless are being found like day 7, 8, and 9. They're not being found right away. And I said, but how are they being found? It's the smell of body decompensation and a neighbor saying something is smelling in the other room. That is not respect. That is not dignity. Dignity is getting you off and doing everything we can to help you get off the substance abuse, help you with your untreated mental illness, help you get a job, secure a financial income, and get a job. There is dignity in work. And a lot of the harm reduction people are saying there's no dignity in work, there's no dignity in recovery. I went to Harmless for the movie we're doing on fentanyl. I went to every harm reduction site I could find. It was fascinating. Not once do they mention treatment or recovery. And I looked at about 15, the big national ones, and including up in Canada. They don't even mention treatment or recovery. They just tell you, here's how to take fentanyl a little safer. And I don't think you can make taking fentanyl safe. I just don't think you can. And so this harm reduction is just sort of lost its sort of the moorings. They've lost their sort of being centered, and it's out of control now.
I'm speaking with Dr. Robert Marbut. He is the former executive director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness from 2019 to 2021. Shorthand for that is the Federal Homelessness Czar. He served under the Trump and the Biden administrations. He also worked, I think, briefly for George Herbert Walker Bush, didn't you, in another capacity? Yeah. And he is a senior fellow with the Discovery Institute's Center on Wealth and Poverty. He is one of our keynote speakers and presenters at the Washington Policy Center's annual dinner in Spokane on September 20th. You can get details on that dinner and tickets at wpcdinner.com. One thing you said earlier, Doctor, was that this is a problem that it should surpass partisanship. Conservatives, liberals, progressives, libertarians, people should be able to find some path forward to treatment. And yet, right now we have promises that were made back in the early 2010s or 2008, 9, 10, 2013. All these promises that homelessness was going to end. We're seeing this exponential growth. And you're saying we've got to come together and find a way for the left and the right to be able to approach these issues. Where do you see that happening successfully anywhere? And for your own approach with, for example, William Baldwin, the actor who's a part of your film campaign and has gone with you on some of these tours, how have you approached this issue so that you can leave partisanship to the side and focus on, what's working?
Well, first off, I don't think homelessness or fentanyl overdoses should ever be a partisan issue. That shouldn't be a Republican or Democrat issue. It shouldn't be, do we want you to die or let you die or not die? This is common sense, humanity, dignity, and respect. So if we start there and start using common sense, then you don't reflex one way or the other, and you start working through common sense. And in terms of places that have changed, I'm very impressed with the Philadelphia mayor from afar. I mean, she's a liberal Democrat. She replaced another liberal Democrat. But the moment she got in, she said, we're basically not going to support these harm reduction policies because they're not working. Not because it's a left-right thing. She just said they're not working. How refreshing is that as common sense that when you say something's not working, we're going to make a change. And so the new mayor in Philadelphia is making that change. I don't know a lot about her. I've never met her. I would like to go meet her. I've reached out and tried to meet her, but haven't yet. But she's using common sense to say when things don't work, we're not going to keep doing dumb anymore, and we're going to make some changes. And sadly, if you look at San Francisco, LA, they seem to double down. They're like, my new thing, and by the way, during that 10-year period where we're supposed to end homelessness, federal spending on homelessness to address homelessness has tripled. Think about that. We've tripled the amount of money. We changed our philosophy, and homelessness doubled. Sometimes when you have a bad government policy and you fund it on steroids, it makes things worse. And so we need to make that change. And you have people like Andy Barr, from Kentucky, a congressman. He's introduced what's called Housing Plus, and it is, let's keep the housing. Housing's part of it. It's not the only answer, but it's part of it. But let's bring back the wraparound services. Let's bring back accountability. Let's bring back accounting, accountability, and treatment programs, and let's combine it with housing, which we were doing under Bush, and we were doing under the first 4 years of Obama Biden. But then now, at the end, when the first term of Obama Biden ended and they went into the second term, they bought all in on this sort of reactionary harm reduction, and it has failed. And so it's time to insert common sense. And when you insert common sense, things become less political, I think. And you start saying, does that work? Does that not work? I mean, Billy Baldwin and I do not have many issues we agree with at all. My sport from my old days in Olympic and his sport from Division I, we actually have tried to kick each other's sports out of the Olympics. I'm paraphrasing or shortening it, but we don't agree on sports. Pentathlon tried kicking wrestling out, and actually wrestling got kicked out because pentathlon stayed in. Then he came along, tried to get wrestling back in, kicked pentathlon out. We disagree on all sorts of policies, across the board, but on the idea of untreated mental illness, let's deal with substance abuse, let's lean into this issue, we have full agreement on. And that's what you're speaking, the fact that he and I share the stage, I am no lefty and he is no righty. And yet we can find common sense approach in here. And we don't agree with every aspect, but we probably agree with 95% of what we should do to make these changes.
If you had a medium-sized city in Washington State, a city like, say, Everett or maybe Pasco or one of the Tri-Cities, and they were dealing with homelessness, is there a specific single tool if they can do one thing? What's the one thing you tell local governments or state governments to do to help actually solve homelessness?
Stop housing first, replace it with treatment. That if you can only do one thing, there are more things you need to do, but if you had only one, stop housing first, stop giving away free housing with no accountability, and create treatment tied to housing. if you can only have one, I wish you'd give me three, but if you can only give me one, that's it. And the cool news is San Antonio's a top seven city. I think we're the seventh largest in the country. Metro area is about the 20th or so. And we are in year 15 of an 85% reduction off the baseline of street level homelessness. Fort Smith, Arkansas, go to the other extreme, very, very small rural community, about 75,000 people. They are year 6 and a 80-90% reduction. In Florida, Pinellas County, and I love this comparison because Pinellas County and Hillsborough County are right across the Tampa Bay. You got East Tampa and West Tampa. East Tampa went all in on housing first, and their number rates have doubled and tripled. And in Pinellas, they said, we're going to focus on treatment and recovery and accountability. And their numbers countywide are in year, I think, 11 of an 85% baseline reduction. And so there are places that have figured it out. And I always remember my favorite story. This was about 8 or 9 years ago. The mayor of Portland at that time came down to see San Antonio, and he said, and the whole group came down, a delegation came down, and he went back to Portland and all the reporters there to interview. And he said, what'd you learn? And he said, well, it works for them, but it would never work for us. And I was like, he missed the point. It worked for them. What can we take from them to work here? And then what do we need locally that's unique to us and change? And so the cities that have chosen to go to treatment and recovery are getting great successes. Those that are doubling down on dumb and continuing to do housing first when it didn't do what it was stated, it did not work. It did not clinically work, and it never was. Then how do you, why do you keep putting money there? And by the way, the few advocates that will engage me now, most have gone underground now, but the few that engage me, you know what they're saying now the problem is? We need more money. They say the philosophy is right, we just need more money. And I'm like, we tripled your funding in 10 years. And under Biden, they've done probably another 25% increase. That's a ballpark number. So we're not quite at 4 times the amount as we were 12 years ago, but we're close. How much more money, how much more doubling down do you need to go when you realize the policy is fundamentally flawed, not we haven't put enough money into it?
Well, I was curious because of what you brought up about, I think it was San Antonio, if they're experiencing a decline in homelessness while other areas are experiencing an exponential increase in homelessness. And the difference is, the policy shift of saying, we're not going to do housing first, we're going to do human accountability first, right? I mean, that's really what to boil it down, that's what you're saying is, we're gonna make sure you get services, we're gonna give you shelter, we're gonna give you care, but first you've got to be willing to be a partner in this, take control of your life, and do certain things so that you're, for lack of a better term, you're earning it back, which is expected of everybody. I don't think that's a negative thing at all. I think it's a dignity thing. So, but am I correct there in saying these other places are experiencing a decline in hardcore homelessness while nationwide we have this exponential increase, and yet there's resistance to taking that the different approach?
There seems to be a real resistance to add accountability into the system, and it just defies common sense in my mind. If you're a parent and you had children, say a 19-year-old child who's off at college, and so you don't legally have the right to tell them what to do, but you see on Facebook that they're doing, drugs, or they're out partying and they're doing cocaine lines, and you don't know what their grades are, but you've gotten a letter from the school that says you're being dropped out because you're not attending classes or whatever. Housing first approach to that would be send your daughter more money so she can do more coke, keeps paying for the apartment, keep paying for the gas card, keep paying for food, and when she's ready for treatment, she'll give you a call. But until then, you keep sending about $20,000 downrange, and you hope she gets better. That's housing first approach toward that story. A common sense accountability approach is you get in the car, get on the plane, mom and dad, even if they're separated, divorced, they still come together. They fly out there, they do an intervention. One of them's on the car going, where's the best treatment program there? And you go there and you say, we're cutting you off from your food. We're cutting you off from your money. We're cutting you off from this. We are not going to give you a cash flow that funds your cocaine habit or your fentanyl habit. And we're going to not only cut you off so you don't keep doing the bad stuff, we're going to do everything we can to pick you up and take you to a treatment program right now and check you in. And we have an appointment ready for you. We don't treat homelessness the way we would treat our own family. And that's mind-boggling. If you talk about dignity and respect, what would you do with your children who's on fentanyl? Would you keep sending them money? Or would you stop it and say, we're cutting you off and we're going to get you into treatment? It's that, this is not complex.
Yeah, that brings me to two different places. One is, the availability of treatment. In my experience, I had a loved one who was struggling, and they said that they wanted help, they wanted to get better, but they had to wait for 2 weeks to get into treatment, and they were gone with the wind before that happened, fatally as it turns out. But and we see that people who are in the throes of addiction, if they don't get treatment right away, they're not going to wait around for it. That's part of their habit of not doing things that are in their own best interest. But there's also been attempts. What's in addition to the availability of treatment, what would you say is the role of law enforcement in this, in terms of getting people to get the help that they need? How important do you think? Because there's a lot of people, especially in the Pacific Northwest here, where they're saying, hey, when law enforcement gets involved, it's criminalizing homelessness. Whereas others are saying, look, when law enforcement gets involved, it forces people, kind of raises the bar of expectations and says, you've reached your rock bottom now. We're not putting up with this. We're going to force you to get help, or you're going to sit in a jail cell and detox that way.
Well, first off, sorry for your loss. Sadly, that I hear that story so many times. So let's hit the first thing, and then we'll go to the second. So the first thing is, this is where people on the other side of the aisle don't do a good job. Yeah, I've been sort of attacking one side for not doing very well on harm reduction. The conservative side needs to realize we need to invest in treatment and recovery. That means you need more money for beds, you need better treatment programs, you need to fund that. And when the conservatives say we need to do something about it, but then they don't fund the treatment, they don't fund the care, they're not really helping either. They're being just as problematic as the other side, because we're not getting a person into treatment. So that side of the aisle, and if Billy was on the Zoom here today, he'd be the first one to be jumping in. He said, the problem is that side's not funding treatment, they're cutting treatment. And so we need to increase treatment. And the problem is we got a lot of catching up. We went 10 years with no treatment. So we're going to invest in it to catch up. And then hopefully then you can start to reduce it at some point. But for the foreseeable future, we need more investment into treatment. Then that gets to be a question of what do you do with first responders, whether it's police, fire, EMS. And I'll share a story that Billy often does. He and I were in Seattle about 3 months ago, and we were going on a street, and we literally see you can't make this up. We literally walk out of the place we're touring. We go less than a half a block, and a person's out on fentanyl, just totally, completely collapsed. Looks like he's not breathing, no respiratory, because fentanyl means it paralyzes your chest. So there's no breathing. So if you don't see an elevation in the chest, you're going to die because you don't get oxygen. And sadly, his name, by the way, was Blessing. You can't make this stuff up. So Billy and I are there. And so we all call 911. We get there. It literally just happens right when we're walking up to the corner. And 2 sheriffs show up. 4 people on a ladder truck show up. Somebody, I think, gives them Narcan just sort of to come out of it. We have 3 people from different nonprofit agencies there. And then we have this special response unit, all directly or indirectly funded by either the city of Seattle or King County. with all of those people there, and they recover them enough. And you know what he says? I don't want treatment. I don't want to go to the hospital. And the lead fire, I don't know if he was a lieutenant, but he had some rank, turns to Billy Baldwin and says, he refused service. You heard him. We have to leave. We got another call. And so everybody disperses. And so we had law enforcement there. We had medical there. We had community service there. And because he refused service, he didn't go. But this gentleman, I got to tell you, I was right there. This gentleman was in no condition to make that decision himself. No condition. And if a person was jumping off of a bridge, and by the way, in Seattle, they have a lot of bridge jumpers, so they have a protocol for that. They don't show up at the bridge and say, oh, you're refusing service. We're going to leave. Just jump it. And by the way, harm reduction would mean just jump at a lower level. You know, you're still going to jump and kill yourself, but just go for it at a lower level. And we're leaving. You would never do that. If they were on a bridge, they would try to, have people come from either side, grab the person, try to get them, put a net out, do all sorts of things. And they would move heaven and earth to get that person off the bridge to save them. But we don't do that with fentanyl. If somebody is about ready to commit suicide and has a gun to his head, police are trained to disarm the person and do everything they can to save them. And a gun to your head or jumping is no different than fentanyl. Fentanyl is the deadliest drug ever invented in the world. It is now killing more people than any other drug ever before, illicit drug. And you would engage that person. But instead, under the laws of, sometimes they're called 72-hour holds, intervention, custodial, each state has different definitions. But police now can't, they're hamstrung. They can't do it. Two sheriffs showed up with Blessing. They couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't do a single thing about it. And so I think we need, and everybody says, well, if it's so bad, you can go to a judge and file a case, and 3 weeks later, a judge might hear it. And I think we got to move this away from lawyers and judges and justices to first responders who are right there, police, fire, EMS, these diversion units, whether it's a community engagement group, and start letting them have the power, because you're not capable of making that decision. And we wouldn't let you jump off a bridge. We wouldn't let you pull a trigger. But on fentanyl, we say you can do it. And in some cities, they'll actually fund you to do it, like San Francisco. I mean, we got to really rethink this and how first responders are used in these issues.
You cut out there just a little bit at the very end. You said in San Francisco.
Yeah, in San Francisco, they actually fund use, and they fund, they call them safe consumption sites. And so we got to move away from funding drug use to promoting drug treatment and get you into treatment programs.
You've been watching Washington Policy on the Go. This is the program from Washington Policy Center. Every other week, we come to you usually with our center directors, but from time to time, special guests like today with Dr. Robert Marbut. He is the senior fellow with the Discovery Institute Center for Wealth and Poverty and was the former federal homelessness czar, the executive director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. He served in the Trump and Biden administrations and also served a third president, George Herbert Walker Bush, for a time as well. Dr. Marbut, this conversation has led me to about an hour or two's other questions, all kinds of questions, including, when you said, when I asked you what was the one thing a city should do, you said, well, if I had to pick one, but there's really three I'd really want them to do. I'm going to wait, and I'm going to make sure that you're asked that question at the dinner, Washington Policy Center's dinner on September 20th, where you and William Baldwin will be there on a Solutions for Homelessness panel, because I'm really curious about that answer, but we're out of time, and I want to give people a sense of urgency and to go get your tickets to the dinner, support Washington Policy Center, and learn about some solutions to homelessness. This has been just a fantastic conversation, and I very much appreciate your time today and your time coming out for Washington Policy Center on September 20th as well. Thank you, sir.
And thank you very much for having us. And I would encourage anybody who's sort of either skeptical or down about this issue, if you can get Billy Baldwin and Robert Marbut to agree on an approach or doing something, maybe we should start having more dialogue like that, because we don't agree on much, but on this we do. And if you can do that, then maybe we should start getting more people to have that sort of dialogue and then take action on it.
It's an exciting approach, an actual discussion about the policy instead of division by personality and just partisan rancors. So very much appreciate that approach, and looking forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you very much, and encourage your viewers and listeners to come out to the dinner.
Thank you, and you can get details on the dinner and tickets at WPCdinner.com. That's WPCdinner.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another edition of Washington Policy on the Go. You can see those events at washingtonpolicy.org. You can register for the events and show up for these lunchtime events every week during the legislative session. Thanks so much for being with us today.